Hi, Graham. It's lovely to meet you. Can you just give us a bit of background who you are, where you're from?
Annabel, yes, it's nice to speak to you too. Yeah, I'm the immediate past chair of the Amersham and Wycombe branch down here in South England, Thames Valley. I live in Beaconsfield. I served in the Royal Air Force for quite a lot of my life, and I was diagnosed with Parkinson's about 7 years ago.
Wonderful. Thank you, Graham. I really appreciate you joining me today. Just have a bit of a chat about the chair role, what's involved, what it's meant to you in the last couple of years that you've been in the role. So the chair role is really about being an ambassador for Team Parkinson's and a leader in your committee for your local group. Keeping up to date with the news and developments of Parkinson's UK, making the best use of the skills and strengths of the other volunteers in your committee, and like I said, really leading by example and encouraging others to do the same. And I know you come highly recommended from fellow colleagues, and I'm sure that your fellow volunteers and those in your group would say the same. So I just wonder, could you tell me a bit about what the key parts of your role have been? I've given that sort of overview there, but what has it been for you? What have those key parts been?
Well, what's been interesting is the last 2 years or so have been completely unprecedented. So it's been a case of actually thinking on one's feet and actually trying to get the best out of what we've got available to us in a changing world. And it was a massively changing world. And those 2 years have changed us all forever in lots of ways, sometimes for the better. But I saw my role as actually harnessing the energy of the individuals who actually I had available to me. And I had them available generally by Zoom. Although we actually had to learn how to use Zoom in the first place, which is quite
I
an
think we've all had
interesting,
to do that, don't worry.
quite an interesting example. And we ended up actually, first of all, I took over as chair 2 weeks before full lockdown. So I didn't even know really about in-person activities at all. I felt I'd never served on the committee. So we ended up actually having meetings with the seniors of my immediate past chair, my vice chair, a treasurer, and a couple of key volunteers as seniors in the group. And we met weekly by Zoom and worked out a strategy. I saw my role as doing the strategy for the branch. The management of the branch, all the others could do pretty well, quite frankly. The tactics of how we get to where we need to get to. But I saw myself as actually heading up the strategy for the branch. And it seemed to work because we could. I decided, because the responsibility was mine as chair. I had to decide what we were going to do, how we were going to manage it, get the maximum benefit for our members actually outside who could communicate, and what was going to give the most bangs for the buck, basically, in the short term. So strategy was key, and thinking through the strategy of this new world was quite important, and communicating that to my members.
Wonderful, thank you. I really love that. Harnessing the energy of the people available to you. That is really sort of that screams chair, doesn't it? I really like that saying. And what resources have you used in your role? What have you found useful and helpful to take?
Well, the resources have been really quite useful, actually, I must say. Maximum best resources is the existing members of the committee. Because they know the business better than you ever do in their own individual areas, the membership person, actually the treasurer and whatever. And you've got to learn those in the early stages because they're all important actually for the management and doing it all things properly. But actually, you mustn't get overwhelmed by all the data that's available to you to help you. Assemble's pretty good there. Your Thames Valley, in my case, my network support manager was pretty good. I found out it was useful for me to get engaged with the headquarters at an early stage, and I helped out with focus groups and other things to try and get a balance between the branch activities and the main charity activities and what we were doing, and actually sitting between them. And I felt I needed also to stick up for the branch actually at a national level as best I could. So I saw myself actually somewhere looking internally to my branch and to my committee and externally to the headquarters, and then beyond that as well.
Fantastic. And yeah, you really supported us through developing that restarting in-person activities resource. And I think that's really important, you know, all the resources we create, the local group directory, the operating framework, volunteers have been involved in all of that to shape that and make sure that it does what it needs to in terms of a governance, bureaucratic sense, that make sure we're meeting our legal and financial obligations, but also that it works for you as volunteers. And that's so important to us. So how do you manage your role? You know, you've had a tricky couple of years and you've talked about learning from the rest of your committee, and how have you managed that role? How have you taken control of it to make sure it's not overwhelming, I guess?
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. Now, what was very useful for me, we actually had a very good branch website and a branch webmaster initially, and everybody had their own email address on the branch, and we could keep in touch quite regularly through our own web page. So there's a lot of communication through webmail, which was quite important for us to actually keep things going, as well as our weekly meetings, which went on to fortnightly in due course. And it was a case of looking and see who was good at what, and be able to delegate to them by asking each committee member to be a lead volunteer or lead committee member in each individual area. So the exercise classes, the singing group, the walking group, or whatever it might be. So I could always turn to somebody and say, "Hey, what's going on with the exercise group?" And know that they had my authority and the committee's authority to actually spend money if necessary, make decisions on our behalf, but as long as they actually took responsibility themselves. And it was actually giving them delegated powers, basically, and saying, yeah, you're in charge of this, and I expect you to look at it and do it, and come to me if there's an issue. And we can discuss it through in committee and get a corporate agreement about what we're going to do. So it was actually giving people delegated powers in the areas they had strengths and interests in. I mean, you don't ask people to do things they don't really want to do. I never asked anybody to do anything I wasn't prepared to do myself. And I think that's actually quite important as a chairman and as a leader to actually do exactly that. Hope that was helpful.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a lot to be said for delegation, isn't there? And sharing the workload. Is it many hands make light work? That's fantastic. And I think it's really important to recognise that at Amersham and High Wycombe, you're quite an active group. You have lots of activities, and you know it made sense for you to meet regularly, weekly, fortnightly, as needed through the pandemic. But you know, not all groups are as active as that. It's completely fine for some groups that perhaps only do one or two activities. You know, there wouldn't be a need to meet quite as regularly then, and things like that. But whatever any of our groups are doing is so important. It's providing that support to people affected by Parkinson's, and it is all about making the best use of the resources to you, and whether that's people or money or you know, the time you've got. It's, as you said earlier on, getting your bang for your buck kind of thing. So yeah, really, really important to acknowledge that all our groups are different. um, Graham, that's been so interesting, and I really, really appreciate your time today. Have you got anything you'd like to add before we finish up?
Yes, I'd like to add, in fact, the branch committee volunteers are absolutely brilliant. I mean, there's no doubt about it. They're the source of resource that you've actually got, and we must reward them. And I think the volunteer team awards, volunteer awards actually, which we give out each year, are really worth doing. I've been very lucky that I've actually had 2 of my nominations have been picked up over the last couple of years, and they were thoroughly deserving of external recognition. So don't forget, as a chair, there is a way of rewarding and thanking people, and you can do it at the annual general meeting. I do that very regularly. The last AGM I put people's names in writing to say thanks for doing this, or whatever. Send out newsletters to say, well, we had a great volunteer meeting with the dung beetles, or what it might be, and we made X, Y, Z, and thanks to X, Y for doing this, and A, Beta for doing such and such. Thanking people is pretty important in all this, especially for volunteers. And the other thing I would remember is that we're all different. And some of us have good days and some of us have bad days. And as a chair, you've got to recognise when somebody's actually having a bad day. Don't press them on things that perhaps they're having a difficulty with. So, and of course, actually, as a chair, you have the same problems yourself. But that's, you keep smiling and lead. That's the important thing.
And I think you talk about a bad day, but sometimes it can be a bad few days and a bad few weeks, and it's really important to acknowledge that. Thank you, Graham. And yeah, absolutely. A thank you goes such a long way, doesn't it? And just taking that time and that effort to recognise individuals is so important, which you've set me up really nicely there to finish up and say thank you to you. Thank you for your time today, but thank you for all your time as chair over the last couple of years. It means so much, and I, although I'm a staff member, have personal connections to Parkinson's, and I know how important our volunteers are, and really appreciate everything you've done at the Amersham and Wycombe group. So huge thank you, and wishing you all the best.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm staying on the committee, so you'll both as well see me around.
Brilliant. We're not getting rid of you that easily.